Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. And be sure to follow the Red Treehouse on Instagram and Threads at Red Treehouse Pod. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Ouija boards. Are they just a mass-marketed child's game with an overstated reputation? Or are they a conduit into a spiritual world beyond our own? The skeptic says it's all fun and games, and is powered not by spirits hoping to communicate, but by the power of suggestion and possibly mischief. The believer, though, uses the board as a tool to connect with the metaphysical world. But let's say the latter is true. What happens when something goes wrong? When the spirit you're communicating with isn't exactly Casper the Friendly Ghost? What if the spirit is malevolent? Or maybe in the worst case scenario, demonic? In this episode of the Red Treehouse, I'm going to tell you 10 true Ouija board nightmares. Is a Ouija board nothing more than a child's game? Or if by playing with one, are you opening a doorway to a spiritual realm and potentially dark and malevolent spirits? I'll share the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Telling this story makes me sound insane, because it's a lot of, weird feelings and nothing actually happening. But here we go. One night I was having a sleepover at a friend's house, and we were all around 12 or 13 years old. There were 6 of us. The person hosting the sleepover had told numerous stories about her house being creepy as fuck, and she was pretty sure it was haunted. She'd heard things like whispering at night, stuff getting moved around, and things getting knocked to the floor. All of this was creepy, but she had plausible deniability because she was 12, and there was also an older brother who had his friends over a lot. She also had a Ouija board she liked to mess around with, and she had some creepy stories about it too. That night, all of us were hyped to see some ghosts. So we're taking turns playing with the Ouija board, and nothing crazy had happened. I hadn't taken a turn yet because I've always been sensitive to that type of stuff, and honestly was scared. However, my closest friend wanted to try and talk to her dad who had recently passed, so I agreed to do it with her. 2 other girls joined, the host and another girl I just recently met, who had been rather emotional that night due to some family issues. We started by asking the board a couple of questions, and mostly received one-word answers. I was having a hard time believing it wasn't one of the other girls moving the planchette. Then the one girl, who'd been mostly emotional that night, asked something kind of serious. "Are you actually my dad?" Or something along those lines. At the same time, all of us visibly stiffen. We go silent and take 5 or 6 seconds to pull our hands away from the board. I had a sharp pain travel up my spine and stop at my neck. In that brief moment of time, I felt like I had to mentally harden. I have no way to explain it other than I felt the pain travel, and I had to brace my mind. We all looked at each other wide-eyed, and one of the girls bursts into tears, shrieking that her leg was in pain. She runs outside, and the 2 who are not participating go try to comfort her. The girl who asked the question tells us that she had a pain travel up her spine and stop in her arms, and that they were still aching. The other girl said she felt pain travel up her spine and through both arms and legs, but the pain went away shortly. And when the host came back, she also confirmed she felt a pain travel through her spine and down to her leg, and that her leg still hurt. I tell them I only felt the spine pain, but it did not hurt anymore. None of us really knew what to make of it, but we were pretty freaked out. We were all on edge the rest of the evening. Most of the girls kept trying on the Ouija board, but I refused to touch the board ever again. Nothing happened after this, but we all convinced ourselves we could see a face in the television. Pretty sure it was just a weird reflection, but who's to say? That night was the one and only time I have ever used a Ouija board. I grew up in a fairly rural part of Alaska. One of my closest friends lived out a ways, and because her mother was a bartender and bars didn't close until like 4 a.m., she was often left home alone quite a bit. Her trailer was absolutely shitty. The foundation had sunk, the pipes froze up and didn't work, and the heater couldn't keep up with an Alaskan winter. The windows always iced over on the inside. We were maybe 14, and my friend's boyfriend brought over the Ouija board and dared us all to use it. Most of our friends were too cool to admit they were scared, but I was a mega chicken. I'd never even done Bloody Mary because I was too afraid. They all settled in to play with the board, but I went to a little back room where they had rabbits and read a book. The room wasn't exactly warm, but it wasn't cold either, and my friend's sister also came, so it was just two of us and the bunnies. Every now and again we'd hear a shriek from the living room, but for the most part, nobody bothered us, so we were fine. At least, that was until my friend came out to see us with the Ouija board. She'd pulled out one of the smaller rabbits, and while laughing hysterically, put it on the board. It sat still for a few seconds, and then it rolled over, and it just died. Bunnies do that. They get so scared that their heart stops, but the timing was seriously horrific. I called my mom and told her I'd walk home if she didn't come and get me, even with the awful roads and it being late night and wild moose out there. I simply left. I didn't go back for months. My friend swore up and down and even to this day that she didn't think it would work, that they'd asked the spirit to show them how strong it was by killing something. But she insists that's exactly what happened. It was only after summer set in and the sun was out all the time that I went back to that trailer at all, and I never went back in winter. It's still a super creepy place, and to this day, I've not used a Ouija board ever again. This one is kinda long, so I'll offer a little bit of backstory. My best friend had a basement, and at the foot of the basement stairs was a door. This door closed off the basement/pool and darts room from the rest of the house. The only problem was, after so many years, the door swelled up and would no longer close. Trying to close the door was a task. It had swelled so much that the flooring had been gouged out from the door scraping so hard. Now for the story. My best friend, myself, and two other friends were playing with the Ouija board in the dark. After about 15 minutes of goofing off, my best friend's mother calls him up for dinner. He doesn't go, and more shenanigans ensue for maybe 5 to 10 more minutes. My friend's mother gets heated. We can now hear her stomping across the house above us. She gets to the stairwell and screams, "Get your ass up here for dinner right now." My friend responds, Okay, give me 2 more minutes." His mother responds, "Don't just stand there at the foot of the stairs, get up here." Now here's the problem. We were roughly 15 to 20 feet from the door. There's no way she saw him. My friend exclaims, "We're sitting at the bar." And the moment the word bar leaves his mouth, The door that nobody could close slammed shut with a purpose. The four of us immediately went from joking around to screaming in panic, as we couldn't open the door. My friend's dad tried to open the door also, and he couldn't do it either. So he ended up jumping in through the basement window, and he had to kick the door through to open it. I never went back to my friend's house, and I never played with a Ouija board after that. The first and only time I ever used one, I was a teenager playing on it with a friend on my back porch. I didn't know of anyone who had died really, except I remembered from an old photo on the wall, a great aunt called Nell. The name Nell stuck with me because I thought it was a boy's name. So I try to talk to Aunt Nell, but when I speak, I say without hesitation or control, "Aunt June." I thought, that's weird. I don't have an Aunt June. I try again and say, I'm trying to speak with and mentally say the word Nell. Aunt June. It was an involuntary response, and I thought it was super weird, but we moved on and kept playing. When my mom got home from running errands, she asked how our game was going, and I replied, "It's fine, except I kept trying to talk to Great Aunt Nell, but kept saying June, which is so weird because I don't have an Aunt June." I still remember my mom's face in that moment. It turns out, I did have an Aunt June. She was a baby who died of SIDS decades before I was born. My mom almost named me after her. I went on to have extreme paranormal experiences that continue to this day, and I think I opened a door that I haven't been able to close. The scariest things that ever happened to me were from when I was a moody 15 to 18-year-old girl. That seemed to really energize my surroundings, and I experienced a lot of scary things. I saw people, heard my name whispered in my ear at night multiple times, heard footsteps daily, and heard a voice mimic my father's and walk around the kitchen. That one convinced me we were broken into, and I stayed outside until my boyfriend came to get me. Of course, nobody was there. My brother moved back into the family house after college and confirmed he also heard a voice mimic our father's and walk around the kitchen. He didn't volunteer this info. I had to pull it out of him over dinner years later. We independently experienced this and didn't know it. While in college, I saw a girl standing over my roommate's bed in the middle of the night. I woke up the next day and was like, "Hey, who was that?" My roommate was like, "Oh, hell no." And she and I still talk about it today. At the time, we were on a sorority hall, so there were a lot of girls in and out, so I dismissed it initially. It only hit me later that I didn't recognize the girl or see her legs. The strangest, weirdest thing in college was someone kept getting into bed next to me. They never touched me, but the mattress went down with their weight, and no one was there. That one really spooked me. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time, and she lived in a huge apartment building. She had a neighbor who lived upstairs and was a few years younger than us, who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbor mentioned that she had a Ouija board and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, and I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal and simply thought they were a myth. We went into a garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first few hours, nothing eventful happened. But eventually, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to this spirit who would answer us. I forget who, but someone asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with any of us specifically. Interestingly enough, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical and thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. It then spelled out my grandmother's name, who died 6 months before this Ouija board encounter. I started getting a little uncomfortable, as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friends did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what her name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it out either. Freaked out, I asked what my quote-unquote grandmother wanted. She started spelling out U-R-G-R, and then the planchette started going in weird circles and even going off of the board, and was not spelling anything out that made any sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then just said, "You-are great. This will be important later, so keep this in mind." Anyway, I just thought it was us moving it weirdly, and then said goodbye. A few days later, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, suddenly passed away. It was unexpected, as he was in great health, and this was right before Christmas, and he had expressed so much excitement for Christmas. As I was at his funeral, I remembered sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's when it hit me. When the Ouija board, or my grandmother, initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I realized that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette moved around weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if something was stopping my grandmother from completing the word and warning me. The next few months were hell, as I started blaming myself and was convinced that I somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using this board. It got to the point where I became super depressed, and the scary part is, I felt like my thoughts weren't me at all. I felt as if something was trying to lead me down a dark path, and that whatever it was super dark. I can't explain it, as it might have been guilt, but I felt like something was watching me all the time, and I felt a strange presence in the next few months after using the board. There is also the fact that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights. I had a strange feeling and felt that I needed to walk away immediately. But right when I did, the light shattered, and they would have injured me if I was standing underneath. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I felt a giant weight lift off of my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if the spirit I contacted was even my grandmother. I also wondered if I was imagining this dark presence and the dark thoughts that I'd had. Fast forward, I was at an overnight event at my school, and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and find some answers. At one point, the Ouija board said it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out D-E-V. We started panicking, but then it spelled out a word that I forgot. I dismissed it and thought it was nothing at all, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that the word meant devil in another language. It was then confirmed to me that it might not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There is also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me, and it did not have good intentions. To this day, I am convinced that the spirit only tried to warn me about my grandfather so that when he passed, I would have felt guilty. By feeling guilty, I would have been more vulnerable to the spirit's influence, to the point that I would do some really dark and disturbing things. I do not know if this actually happened, but it's the only logical explanation that I have. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. I once used a Ouija board with my roommate, her friend, and my boyfriend at the time. My roommate, we'll just call her Kelly, and I had just moved into a very old apartment building and had been spelunking around the basement when we passed an empty storage unit. Kelly and I were walking in single file. I was in front, and she was in back. And as I passed the open door of the storage unit and looked in, I got this awful feeling of terror and dread, which passed as soon as I walked by. I'm naturally afraid of the dark, and I figured it was probably caused by that. But then my roommate behind me suddenly said, "Did you feel that?" and described the same exact thing. We ran back upstairs and freaked out together. That weekend, my boyfriend brought a Ouija board over because we had never used one before and wanted to know what was going on in the basement. The first spirit we talked to was pretty funny. It said it was a sailor that died on the rack in the 1800s. We asked it what it did to pass the time on the boat. It answered, "Drink." We asked if it had any hobbies. It answered, "Drink." We laughed, and that seemed to be a good start for us. But then it got weird. We asked it what its name was, and the planchette paused, and then slowly spelled out blonde in answer. We asked how old it was, and it spelled out blonde. So we looked at our blonde friend who was playing and asked, "Are you trying to talk to Megan?" It answered yes. She took her hands off and refused to play anymore, at which time the planchette proceeded to slide to goodbye. The second spirit. So we asked the Ouija board if anyone else was there. The planchette slid to yes. We asked it what its name was. It paused, and then slowly spelled out AWA. It then told us the building we were in was built in 1903, which we later confirmed was true. And when we asked it if there were any other spirits in the building, it answered yes. Obviously, the next question any idiot college students would ask was, "Are they good?" The planchette slid to no. At some point around this time, we all got spooked and pulled away, except for my boyfriend, who wanted to continue talking to it by himself. I don't remember how it happened, but suddenly after a minute or two of bland questions, the planchette paused and then started moving extremely quickly. This caught our attention because prior to this, it had been moving a bit lackadaisically. The spooky thing is, it kept swiftly spelling out the same word over and over and over again. And when we looked closer to spell it out, we realized it was spelling out attack, 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 attack. I'm legit getting goosebumps writing this out again. My boyfriend pulled his hands away, and we blew out the candles and put the board back under our coffee table and went to the bars to forget about it. Fast forward to a couple of weeks later, and my mom, a very devout Christian, stopped by and saw the board and freaked out. "Why do you have a Ouija board? It's demonic. That's dangerous." And then started praying at it and pointing at it while saying, "In the name of Jesus, I bind you, Satan. You have no power here." We laughed, including my mom, at the hilarity of the scene and moved on. The Ouija board never worked again. We tried a couple of times after, but the planchette would just slide off the table in response to any questions and never spelled out any word ever again. I told my mom this story years later, and she proceeded to pray at all the Ouija boards at the local game shop after that. I told her that was destruction of property, but I still never played with a Ouija board ever again. Over 10 years ago, I was in a bad place mentally. I am a firm believer in the occult and believe in a higher power, ghosts, and the supernatural. At the time, I had collected a few Ouija boards and was really into trying to speak to the dead. After several months of feeling like I was a medium, I was beginning to feel off. I was having horrendous thoughts that were very out of character for me. I won't even mention them because they're super dark and they still scare me to this day. It got so bad that my hands were bleeding because I could not stop washing them. The guilt I felt from having these thoughts was taking me over, and I thought I was going insane. It was around this point that I knew I needed to have a conversation with my mom about what was happening. So I told her everything, and she told me I needed to see a doctor. I began researching OCD and the effects of it. A week or so after confiding in my mom, I went and saw our family doctor. At 16, I was terrified of the idea of being mentally ill, but I nervously told the doctor everything that I had been feeling, and he filled out a prescription for Prozac and recommended I see a shrink. I take the papers and shrug home. I tell my mom what the doctor had said and start to plan my road to recovery. A few days later, while researching some stuff about Ouija boards and trying to take my mind off of things, I came across an article about something called demonic oppression. Holy fuck. This was me. This was the definition of what was happening to me. My symptoms were all on par with what the article was referencing. Basically, it's the idea of not being possessed and having a demon in you, but the idea of one being around you, trying to bring you down as much as possible. It can lead to demonic possession. The number one way it was believed to entice a negative energy to harass you was playing with Ouija boards. I then began researching how to be rid of this hypothetical oppression. Get rid of the boards and make sure you dispose of them correctly. So I began to do so. I broke the boards and separated the pieces, making sure the pieces never touched when disposed of, and I separated the planchettes as well. I put them all in separate bags and sat the bag in our garbage for a day or two. Garbage day rolled around, and I heard the truck outside around the corner making its stops. Shit. I forgot I had kitty litter stuff to throw out, so I ran downstairs and headed out the front door. My dad stopped me at the bottom of the stairs and proceeded to mock me for having to clean up cat shit. I ignored him, not making eye contact as he was annoying me and full on laughing at me at this point. I darted past him and threw the shit into our bin and saw the Ouija board bags being put into the garbage truck. When I enter the house, it's quiet. I yell to my dad and no one answered. 15 seconds go by and my mom comes in from work. She says hi, and I ask, "Where did Dad go?" She tells me he hasn't been home yet from work and that he had to pick something up from the grocery store. I tell her he must have forgotten to stop on the way home because I just spoke to him in person like 2 minutes ago. She said that's impossible because she was just talking to him on the phone. I run to a phone and call him. Sure enough, he's still at the grocery store and is totally confused with what I was talking about. I hung up in complete shock. No one else was home, and it 100% looked and sounded like my dad. I know that was the last hurrah for this thing, and that it fully enjoyed making me feel like the devil's toilet paper. After the boards were taken away, all of my symptoms stopped. Like overnight stopped. But I'm still scared to think of what I might have seen had I looked my quote-unquote father in the eyes that day. I only played with the Ouija board once. It was my first and only time. I was at a friend's apartment in the same complex. There were about 5 of us just unwinding after a heavy day of drinking by the pool. My friend's roommate brought up that he had a Ouija board, and we were all kinda drunk, so we thought, why not? Initially, it was only my friend and his roommate using the board. They were sitting on the ground with the board across their knees. Keep in mind, my friend has never used a Ouija board either, so I was watching him learn. At first, it looked like he was moving the planchette, but then it turned to a really smooth movement, and the board just started spitting up random sequences of numbers that baffled everybody. So the guys who were just looking thought this was total bullshit and wanted to do something else. Everyone was gonna quit until I told them, I know those numbers. It was my sister's birthday. They asked the board if it wanted to speak to me, and it said yes. Everyone immediately told me to get on the board, and I obliged. So I switched places with my friend's roommate on the board, and we began to ask questions. I asked how it knew my sister's birthday. Mind you, my sister is still alive and well. Then I remembered, my sister is named after one of my great-grandmothers because they share the same birthday. The spirit claimed to be my relative, so I'm thinking that's how it knew those numbers would mean something to me, because they were my sister's birthday too. Anyway, I asked if it was there to help me, and it said no. Then one of my friends yelled out and asked if it had come to hurt me. The question made me really uneasy, but the board said no. I asked if it was just there to watch and monitor me, and it said yes. It told us its name was Yolanda, and she told me she died of diabetes. I just remember at one point me and my friend spinning, but not spinning the planchette so fast and in such smooth circles that it tripped out everyone who was there. I also remember me and my friend looking away from the board altogether and having the onlookers say the letters and it spell complete words. After it was all over, I felt rather indifferent about the experience at first. It was purely overwhelming for me to think about at that point, especially because I had been drinking so much. As time passed, I tried to dismiss this as strangely coincidental and that it really didn't mean anything. Fast forward a month or two later, and I'm back at home for a weekend on a Sunday morning, and I asked my mother casually if she had an aunt or a great-aunt named Yolanda, or if that name had any significance to the family. I'll always remember the way she turned around and had the most blank stare I've ever seen on her face. She immediately asked me where I heard that name from, and I didn't lie. Me and my friends were fucking around with the Ouija board, and that name was brought up. She just told me, "You shouldn't mess around with that stuff. Why were you messing around with that?" I confronted her. "Mom, who's Yolanda?" She just kept saying, "Don't mess with that stuff. Promise me you won't ever mess with that stuff again." And I asked once more, and she walked out of the room. To this day, I have never confirmed or denied the existence of a person named Yolanda in my family. So this happened a few years ago, sometime around 2019. I was over at a friend's house, and we had a good amount of people to play with their Ouija board, so maybe 5 or 6 people or so. I want to preface this by mentioning the board we were using was used before to summon the well-known Ouija demon, known as Zozo, by the person who owned the board. They supposedly sold their soul to Zozo for the demon to protect them from their biggest fear, which was being in a car crash or something similar to do with cars in that way. Anyways, we started playing. We circled the board with the planchette to warm the board up and began asking questions. It began to answer, responding yes to if there was a spirit with us, and answering basic questions such as its name, how old it was, and why it died, which it gave answers to. I believe the first spirit had answered hospital. The group I was playing with began to ask dumb and all too playful questions, and not taking it seriously, even making fun of me when I chastised them for not being serious about it. So I stopped playing with them after a while, and I remember their non-serious nature went on for a while longer, but as they continued to ask questions, they all had gone silent and seemed to become more entranced by the board. At one point I looked, and they continued to ask questions, but they were deeply focused and having a very, very long session with it. I had tuned out mostly at this point, hanging out with my other friend on the couch who had also opted not to join into the session. This wasn't what I was interested in playing. I just had no tolerance for the group not taking the game seriously, as I've always experienced paranormal shit since I was a baby, in every single one of my homes I had lived in prior, and I was really sensitive to the paranormal. This was my first experience with the Ouija board, before I was followed by something I can't explain. I asked to borrow the Ouija board, and my friend gave me permission. This marks the next time I played with the board, which this is going to be very dumb and cliche, but the day was Friday the 13th, and I decided on playing in a park. My friend and I took the board to the park, and I managed to find a few strangers to play with, which was my next mistake. We sat down and circled the board, and I took to asking the questions. The spirit I managed to contact began to give me random letters, as opposed to the previous session having clear English written out. I asked if this was Latin, as I knew if the board began speaking Latin, you're supposed to end the session immediately. It answered yes. Then I asked if it was a negative spirit. It answered yes again. Then, this is my next mistake, I asked it permission if I could end the session. It told me no, then began to circle the board in wide circles. I got really uncomfortable and tried to push the planchette to goodbye, and a strong force pushed against the planchette, not allowing me to pull it to where I needed it to go. I eventually managed to push it to goodbye and told the spirit it was not allowed to contact me again. I cut contact with the session and flipped the board, believing the session was cut off, but I left with a deep feeling of dread in my stomach, like something wasn't right. And that feeling was correct. My ex and I kept the board at his house in his shed for some time after that, because when we kept it in his house, strange things would happen, such as hearing random footsteps, doors opening and closing on their own, strange knocks underneath the floor, and his bedroom door wiggling. We returned the board to the original owner after this, the one who had summoned Zozo with it, because we didn't want it around anymore, and the owner had wanted it back. After all of this, a spirit followed me home. I would hear footsteps running up and down my stairs outside of my bedroom. I would wake up freezing cold with a deep feeling of dread, and a figure at the foot of my bed. One night, there was heavy banging noises in the garage, which my parents blamed on me, to which I frantically responded, "See? Something isn't right. Something did follow me home from the Ouija board." They began believing me more that night after the banging continued. I was so scared during this time that I sprinkled salt around my entire bed and door frame, smudged it with white sage before I knew it was closed practice, slept with crosses and a Bible on my bedside table, and prayed to God every night. I became extremely spiritual around this time because I honestly had no idea what else to do or where to turn. I just wanted the haunting to stop. One morning, my ex and I heard my mom knock on my bedroom door and ask us, "Why are you guys still sleeping?" And he got aggravated at my mom waking us up so early. I checked the time and it was 7 a.m., which is really unlike my mom to be wondering why we were still sleeping at that time. When I went upstairs, a bit annoyed, to ask her about it, she was on FaceTime with my sister's kids in the living room and had no idea what I was talking about. My mom isn't the type to prank me or to lie, and she was really busy with the FaceTime call at the time that it happened. I honestly think back and wonder if whatever asked us why we were sleeping was mimicking my mom or was an entirely different woman's voice, and we had just chalked it up to being my mom, since that's the only lady in the house. The thought still makes me sick. The person who owned the board who summoned demons was also extremely troubled, and after about a year or two, I lost contact with them. I haven't touched the Ouija board since, and the experience left me with some trauma. I still sleep with the lights on. I still continue to use my pendulums, tarot cards, practice with gems, and scrying. But I never touched the Ouija board again, and I never will. The concept still interests me, and the fact that I did have such a profound experience, I'm not sure if I'm morbidly lucky to have had. At this point, I'm just glad that thing that had followed me home stopped contact after some time. Our family had a very bad experience with previous tenants who admitted to Ouija board use in the house before we moved in. First off, I'm going to throw a caveat out. This story is true. I haven't embellished it, which makes it even more creepy. And everyone in my family who visited us while living in this house backs it up. Sorry, the story is a bit long, but a lot went on. Hope you packed a lunch. It all goes back to about 1982 to 1985. I was but a 3.5-year-old. I have a sister who is 1 year younger, and my parents had just moved into a house in Brisbane. My dad was a journalist. He's now passed away. And my mother was a midwife who at this stage had taken some time off to be at home with us. The house itself was a single story at the front and went into a double story at the back. The front of the house had the living room and my room, while the back of the house was joined by a carpeted landing with stairs that went up to a master bedroom on the left, a nursery straight ahead, and a bathroom to the right. At the bottom of the stairs was a side door leading to an entertainment/barbecue area with the backyard out the back. If you turned right at the base of the stairs, and not went out the side door to the concrete entertainment area, you passed under an arch frame that led to a large, L-shaped concrete rumpus room under the house. Inside the L-shaped rumpus room, and under the stairs above, was a dark tiled laundry. At the back of the rumpus room was another back door leading out directly to the backyard. Got me so far? Good. Sorry for the architectural intro. Dad would often work late at night, so he was barely home. Do the maths on that one, and work out why they later divorced. So Mom was left often in the house at night with my brother and my sister for company. Mom said the first thing she noticed after a month or two of living there was that our old dog Raina would refuse to enter the house and spent all of her time in the backyard in her kennel. Apparently, if Mom was bringing in the washing, the dog would happily follow her up to the back door, but as soon as she reached the back door, her tail would drop and she would start whimpering. Mom thought it was odd, but nothing more got said. She put it down to the dog being a dog. But then weirder things started happening. The laundry room would flood for no reason, with adjacent rooms left completely dry. Mom and Dad would walk down the back of the house to find light bulbs shattered from their sockets. Mom said she absolutely detested walking in the back of the house at night, as she said that as soon as she entered the stairway/landing area, her hair would stand on end. She told me it felt like someone was watching me even as I walked past her on the stairs. As you can imagine, checking on my baby sister at night soon became an event to dread, when ordinarily she would have been happy to do so. The weirdness continued. However, it started to ramp up over a few months when Mom and Dad said they used to hear shuffling feet coming from the rumpus room below when they would be lying in bed at night. Often, Mom said she would be knitting or watching TV at the front of the house by herself, only to hear laughter coming from the back of the house. She'd get up to check, but of course I would be asleep, and nothing would be there. One night, my aunt and my 18-month-old cousin came to stay while my dad and my uncle painted my grandmother's lounge room walls one night after work. My mom and aunt both chatted about their babies, me being a toddler, and my sister a year younger, and my aunt mentioned that my cousin was currently going through teething and was spending some nights crying. This night in particular, my cousin was a little bit in pain, so my mother volunteered to drive down to the local pharmacy and pick up some teething gel to help numb the pain, as we had run out. My mother said to my aunt, "Look, I think there's something wrong with the house, but my husband doesn't believe me, so I'm just warning you. If you hear something, I want you to let me know." My aunt responds, "What do you mean?" My mom says, "Well, I've been hearing some weird things that I really can't explain. And frankly, I'm a little bit scared." My aunt responds, "Oh, rubbish. I'm a very spiritual person, and I have been in a friend's house that was apparently haunted, and I picked up on it, so I can tell you there's nothing wrong with this house." My mom responds, "Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to let you know. I'll be back in about 20 to 30 minutes anyway. I'll see you soon." My mom got back from the pharmacy 30 minutes later to find my uncle's car in front of the house. Sensing something wasn't right, Mom walked in to find my sobbing aunt trying to be consoled by my uncle, while my dad was poking fun at her. My dad says, "Get spooked, did you?" My mom, "You heard something, didn't you?" My aunt responds, "After you left, I could feel thumps coming through the floorboards, and something called my name and laughed from the back of the house. This house is fucking wild." Petrified, my mom tried to find out what was causing this. She got to chatting with the neighbor who said that the previous renter went a bit crazy and went downhill after a messy divorce. She got into some weird religion and often would have people come by the house every few weeks where they would hold seances in the house. Being a churchgoer, at this stage of my mom's life, she said she felt a shiver go up her spine as she started realizing what may have been an explanation for what was going on. Turns out, the woman was a Satanist. Mom asked, "Where did they used to hold these seances? Do you know?" The neighbor replied, "Oh, we used to see them put candles in the rumpus room windows, so they used to hold them in there." Needless to say, Mom was determined to move out from that point. Dad, of course, didn't really believe her, so they were staying put. Needless to say, despite all our toys and trikes being in the rumpus room, Mom said I would never play down there. She had just put it down to kids not wanting to leave their mother's feet at such a young age. My older cousin, who was a year older than me, flatly refused to go down to the rumpus room when she visited. She told my aunt and mom that things down there spooked her out. A few more months went by, and apparently I started complaining to my mom of a man who sat on top of my wardrobe looking at me at night. She got rid of the wardrobe. A few weeks later, she was getting changed in her room at the top of the house. I was down at the front of the house watching Sesame Street, and when she went to get out of her room, she found the door was locked. She started shaking the door, but it refused to open. She called out to me, but I wouldn't have heard her. She was 7 months pregnant with my baby brother, who was 4 years younger than me, but she was forced to shimmy down the drain pipe and onto the side entertainment area from outside, which, by the way, is not a dignified pose for a pregnant woman. She came back up through the side door, up the stairs, and found her bedroom door wide open and unlocked. She came and scolded me and said, "Don't ever lock Mommy in her room again." I apparently claimed black and blue that I hadn't stopped watching the TV. Mom believed me. About this time, she decided enough was enough, and so she approached the local pastor to ask what to do. He suggested 2 options. 1, they ignore it and hope it went away. Or 2, they play loud hymns and read Bible verses to try and anger whatever was there into leaving. He also said they thought that it could anger them, and that they might throw stuff around. My great-grandmother, who was a very religious person, walked into the rumpus room one day and told my mother, "There were evil, evil faces looking at me and leering at me down there," after walking downstairs to get a toy for me. A pastor later confirmed that, "Take it or leave it, and you might think I'm mad, but you have 2 to 3 demonic manifestations/entities residing in the back of your house." That was the last straw. Mom packed our stuff and started looking for another house. My dad and her were divorcing at this stage, so he was gone frequently. But this wouldn't be the evil's last parting shot. My mother, about a few days from moving out, went out to check on my sister, who was now 2 years old, while she was asleep in the top-story nursery, which was now her room. On checking the closet, she found something that she hadn't noticed before, an old Ouija board. But then she noticed something else. My sister wasn't on her cot. The window above the cot and it was one of those old design heavy horizontal sliding windows with a vertical latch halfway up one side, was wide open, and the fly screen behind it had its rubber seal hanging in the breeze, with the flap of fly screen swinging right next to it. Underneath her window was an annex over the back door, which now had a huge dent in the fiberglass, and its supports were broken. There was my sister crawling around the backyard, with the dog playing beside her. Mom freaked out and rang the doctor ASAP, who came and checked her out. She was fine, but had a bit of a concussion. When Mom, Dad, he was home at the time, and the doctor asked what happened, she exclaimed, "Doggy, down, down, down." Evidently she had fallen, although falling out of a window that she couldn't climb out of, nor reach, nor open, seems a bit too convenient. Out the window, and had seen the dog running around the backyard beneath her. Needless to say, we were gone that day. To this day, I've never played with a Ouija board, and as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I think it's just a fear of the unknown. Is it a kid's toy? I don't know. Is it a conduit? I don't know. And it's that uncertainty that keeps me from messing with it. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Does playing with a Ouija board invite the spiritual world into ours? And have you had a scary experience when playing with one? If so, email me at redtreehousepod@gmail.com, and I'll feature your story in an upcoming episode. I want to know what you think. I've shared the stories. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.